The bus ride. Hector Alvarez hesitated as the doors to the M4 bus came to a halt in front of him. The mag repulsors keeping the bus hovering several inches off the ground hummed loudly in his ear. As a kid, he hated the buses. When they came through the neighborhood, they made the dogs go wild, and when they came through during the night, they woke him from his sleep. His feet felt weighted down. He was coming back. Someday he knew he was coming back. The mid-layer was his home. It would always be his home. And yet, seeing his home, an apartment, one of many underneath the thick shadow web of the upper layer's speedway, he felt a pang of guilt. Fletcher had been one of Hector's best friends growing up. He was his hermano, his brother in everything but blood. They'd lived on the same block, gone to preschool, hell, even dropped out of high school on the same day, but now Fletcher was gone. What reason did he really have to stay? The door to the bus was closing. Quickly, Hector put his hand in the doorway and stepped inside. "Layer pass, please," chimed a voice. Hector looked down where the driver's chair would have been. Hector saw a flat scanner disc. The bus was one of the Transit Authority's self-driving cars. Standing on the disc was a hollow projection of a woman. She was near featureless, a form of gray-white that fizzled in and out of existence on a damaged projector. It was only the body shape and breasts that could make it recognizable as a woman. "Layer pass, please." The projection AI held out its hand as though to be handed something. Just then it flickered, the image contorting like it was in pain before returning to its original stance as though nothing had happened. Hacker, Hector thought, messing with the system. He couldn't say why a hacker was breaking into the Transit Authority, or who would even have the gull. It used to be that Hector would have applauded such an act, but now all he could do was pity the poor soul who crossed the consortium. Hector went into his duffel bag. Inside was his wallet. Money on Isru didn't get you much on the upper layer. They took credits, but on the mid and end layers, you could still get some use out of them. Once he got to the Dragon Square in Chinatown on the western side of the mid-layer, he would pay his way off of Isru. Where he went from there was anyone's guess. Next in his bag was his holophone. He and Fletcher had hacked their Arrow Enterprises V2 model holophones a year ago, getting rid of the nasty little watchdog AIs that monitored them through the hypernet. He moved the phone over and saw the gleaming silver of the gun. His heart nearly jumped. Hector hadn't even remembered packing it. Maybe that was a good thing. He wasn't sure. Fletcher was the one who'd gotten the gun in the first place. Hector had been with him when he'd gone to get it. They'd gone to a sketchy part of the city, borrowing a friend's car so they wouldn't have to deal with the Transit Authority and, through association, the consortium. They'd stopped in front of a building. A network of rusted red pipes diverged out of it, crudely like tree branches, extending up towards the upper layer. Steam hissed out, blanketing the air in a thick fog. People like he and Fletcher had no business being in this section of the city. They weren't pushovers exactly. They'd been in a few scrapes here and there, mostly fights started over a heated argument that escalated to a thoughtless punch. That was child's play compared to where they were. Fletcher had been gone a long time. He'd left the keys in the ignition at Hector's insistence. Hector was getting light-footed. He thought he saw movement in the distant fog. He'd heard too many stories of people just disappearing in the city every day, and he had no desire to be one of them. Fletch came back, quick in step, paper bag swinging in hand, a big grin on his face. "You got it," Hector said, opening the door to the car. Fletch grinned, showing him the silver gun at the bottom of the bag. "I can't believe you did this," he rubbed his face. "Come on, man," Fletcher said, stuffing the bag underneath his seat before turning on the car. Better to have it than not need it. That was before, when things seemed so simple. He and Fletcher were just little guppies in a big sea. They thought avoiding the sharks was an easy endeavor. He'd been so stupid. He pushed the gun aside before finding his layer pass, a thin cold card of metal with his personal information imprinted on it. Well, not his information. Anyone looking at the card would only find an old widow named Jan Austin, living in a pricey loft in one of Babylon's many lofty high-rises. He showed it to the hollow AI. The white-gray figure scanned it before bowing. "Please seat yourself and enjoy the ride." The AI winked off. The bus hummed loudly before rising a bit higher off the ground and joining the loose traffic that droned by, completely unaware of him or his plight. Hector faced down the bus aisle. It smelled like ripe piss, fitting for a bus on mid-layer. Only a few people were on. A bum, wrapped in a long tan overcoat, slept soundlessly along the back seats. An old grumpy-looking Japanese grandma sat near the bus's secondary mid-door. Hector wondered if she had been a part of Isru's initial construction, or if she'd come after like Hector's parents after the wars. One of the last people sitting was a boy sleeping next to the window, close to the front. He was perhaps 17 or 18. Younger than Hector, he was sure, and oddly. Next to him was a doll. The doll was the size of a small child, perhaps between 4 and 5 feet tall. It had long white hair, wore a black Gothic dress and bonnet. Its face was white as snow, and its lips were a faint pink. It stared unblinkingly with glossy, inhuman blue eyes towards the front of the bus. It was beautiful but haunting. It looked like one of those creepy-looking dolls in scary movies that came to life, as though without question it could get up and walk away. And then the doll turned to look at him. "Ay, Dios mío," he whispered under his breath. No, it wasn't a doll at all, but an android of some kind. It had to be. The doll turned to look back at the front of the bus. Hector sat down in the seat next to the doll and the young boy. He tried not to make eye contact, but couldn't help himself. His fool's curiosity had been lit. The young boy's face was turned towards the window. The hood over his head obscured any sight of his face. Hector didn't recognize him. Most divers in the central borough knew each other. If any of them came across an Andy as decorative as this, they wouldn't shut up about it. Hector had never seen an android like that. Most Andys he'd come across had human shapes, but faces that could never pass for a person. Construction and graffiti-riddled maintenance bots were the most common in Central. They worked on Central Borough's pillar that kept the upper layer high and in the Pacific air. Central's pillar was somewhat harder to see. Many roads and speedways crossed overhead, blocking out the view. He knew some places in the upper layer sold human-looking Andys, but they were only for top-tier officials in the consortium. Occasionally, you'd come across a stolen, reprogrammed Andy at night, working the southern pillar, turning tricks along with the flesh and blood, street-walking ladies of the night. This doll, though, was something Hector had never seen or heard of before. The bus turned corners and hummed through the neighborhood. Mid-layer was always moody and Central Borough was the moodiest. Speedways and L-trains of the upper layer crisscrossed over the dirty streets, casting shadows and leaving spears of light to come through. The bus hummed by a construction site. Orange-colored construction mechs went about moving steel and dirt with their claws and scoopers tearing away at the artificial foundation. A man in a hard hat directed the pilots like a conductor. Growing up, Hector had always wanted to work in construction, like his father had. He'd helped to build this part of Central. He told Hector when he was young that he wanted to make a home for his family. Victor Alvrias had come a long way from the small village by the sea in the Mexico of his youth. He'd left to make a life for himself. Hector had always admired his father for that. His father was only 17 when he met his mama, Rika, on his way to Isru in California. She'd been 16, an American with so little, like all others at the time, fleeing west from the Second American Civil War that had ravaged much of the South and Midwest of the fractured country. They'd met in a group of weary refugees, her group coming from the West, his father coming up from the South. The day was kissed deeply by a soft sunset. They bumped into each other by happenstance. According to the smiling accolades of Rika Alvarez, they never let their eyes part ways. His father convinced her to come to Isru with him. This was all many, many years ago, before Hector was even a thought to his parents. Hector loved his mother. She always smelled like the sweetest flowers. Whenever she had entered a room, Hector could tell she'd been there. She was soft and hard all at the same time, punishing him for his misdeeds, but soothing him afterwards and explaining to him what he had done wrong. His father could be stern, overly so at times. Years of work had made the man gruff and short in outward affections, but Hector always respected him, always would. He took care of his family, never hurt him or his mother. He could be hard to understand at times, but Hector always thought he tried to be true and do the right thing. His mother said he and his father were the same. "You too," she'd said once, smiling as she'd put wet clothes on the line at the back of their home. It was a short, stout wooden house resting under a beam of light that found its way through the crisscross of upper roads. His father had built the house himself. "You're so much like your father. You hold all your cards to yourself. I thought it was cute when he was your age." As Hector grew up, he became distant from his family. Dealing with Fletcher and getting more and more into diving, he discovered his love for the hypernet. It wasn't long after, when he was 18, that he and his father had their falling out. He didn't want to be in construction anymore. He wanted to dive every day whenever he wanted. His father thought it was a waste of time, just another way for the consortium to control the broken world. His father had left him with two options: leave, become his own man, or stay. Hector made his choice. Victor Alvarez died a couple years ago in the house he built next to the woman he never let his eyes leave from on that sunset-kissed day. Hector's only regret with his old man was that he never told him how much he respected and loved him. He felt the same way about Fletcher. He glanced over at the doll. Her owner stirred a bit. Hector still couldn't get a good look at his face. What did it matter, really? Soon he'd be long gone, running away from everything. He went through his bag and found the gun again. Looking at it, he couldn't help but smile nervously. He didn't even know how to fire the damn thing correctly. Fletcher had been so convinced that they would be able to protect themselves. He remembered shooting cans in the empty manufacturing facility near their apartment. He thought fondly on the old place. When he thought hard, he could even smell the old cinder block and hear the hum of hover cars in the lanes above, alongside the scuttle of the rats running into the shadows. It had been their hangout for years. Fletcher had found it, of course. He'd always been the more adventurous of the two. Hector thought it had something to do with him being albino, as though he had to make up for something. After school, they would hang out, dive, and tell each other stories. Diving in that old place still felt right, even with Fletcher's blood still brown against the weed-filled cracks in the floor. The doll was looking at him again. All Hector could do was eye it back before it slowly turned its head. Weird, he thought. Hector tapped his foot. He looked out the window. They were still in the central borough, passing by the old arcade. That's where he and Fletcher first learned about dive surfing from the upper layer kids. Some of the rich kids who came down from the upper layer had halos. They probably thought they were being edgy or tempting fate when they came down to mid-layer. When Fletcher and Hector first approached, some of them tensed up, and he and Fletcher just smiled at each other. He and Fletcher were harmless, just interested in the one bald kid with the odd sectioned-off surgery marks on his head. This had been their first introduction to the Halo, a partial cybernetic brain enhancement that was quickly growing in popularity. They already had a love for computers that they'd bonded over in remedial computer class during elementary school. When he and Fletcher first heard about the Halo, they knew they had to have ones for themselves. Getting the money together took time, but was relatively easy. They'd gotten into hacking the way kids their age had gotten into video games, bike riding, surfing, hoverboarding, or skateboarding. They found if they watched each other's backs, they could sneak their way into bank accounts, stealing small amounts of money each time and depositing into a bank account in England. They knew they couldn't get greedy lest they'd be found out. They went for older marks, grandmas and grandpas, that had been wealthy and powerful in their youth, that now sat alone in empty houses in the upper layer with only pretty android maids to keep them company. Luckily, greed's temptation never found them. They only wanted the halos. The cash was just a means to an end. After almost 2 years of work, they had enough. They'd gone up to Babylon, selling their parents on a field trip to a seaside resort town in Japan. They'd created fake permission slips and even gone so far as to hire a school bus filled with some kids from the southern borough just to complete the show. It was all worth it, though. The surgery, the years spent leading to the moment. They'd gone home with hats over their heads so not to show the scars on their scalps. Hector remembered slipping up to his room, his parents watching TV in the living room with a smile on his face. Having the Halo was like seeing the world for the first time. He could check the time, weather, watch a movie, and even talk with Fletcher from the other end of the borough. And what was best of all was diving. At the moment, his heads-up display was turned off. Some people took to the Halo better than others. Hector was one of the people that loved the technology, but could live without it for a time. Not Fletcher, though. He could spend days in a dive, sifting through thousands of years' worth of data. That's what they did for fun. Or at least, that's what they used to do. The bus made a stop near an old electronics store. It was run down and the front window was broken in. The glass was dusty and jagged. When no one got in, the bus closed its doors and continued on. If only he and Fletcher hadn't been diving. If only they'd gone out for the night with some of the other friends they had like they planned. "One quick peek," Fletcher had said in his room. His room always smelled like weed. Strangely, Fletcher never reeked of the stuff. Hector had caved easily. Days ago, they'd found a workaround into some of the consortium outer defenses. It wasn't anything special getting into the system. The data walls were always being broken into by other divers, and the consortium couldn't patch every hole in time. Sometimes they left small openings big enough to slip through. It was one of these holes Fletcher had discovered and had been raving about for the past few days. There was always something interesting to find on the outer layers of the consortium's data storage. That's what Fletcher thought. They usually led to in-offices servers. Divers made a pastime at finding all kinds of dirty laundry, which oftentimes ended up being an old snide email lost in the system, or a video now and then. One diver Hector knew once brought a recording of a low consortium official going at himself onto his desk. That got a lot of laughs from the forum. He and Fletcher hadn't expected anything out of the ordinary when they snuck through. They wouldn't have even found anything unless Hector hadn't been curious. He spotted something in the server, an open comms channel leading to the higher levels of the consortium's data walls. Really, he wanted to blame those stupid corporate shitheads. Who talks about that on an open channel where anyone looking could see? They should have pulled back then. Even Fletcher, who loved to dive and see what secret the depths of the hypernet held, wanted to pull back. Hector should have listened. Fletcher was always a better diver than him, had instincts. Hector just didn't. Hector managed to record the comms channel, though, but failed to notice the multiple watchdog AI guarding the comms link. When the watchdogs spotted them, the comms link terminated, and the outer defenses sprung up. He and Fletcher barely made it out with Attack Hound and Watchdog AI on their tail. When they came back up from the dive, they looked at each other. A couple days later, Fletcher got the gun. A wave of remorse ebbed out of him. He tried to hold on to his emotions, fearing that anyone close with a halo could pick up on his pulse. His eyes caught sight of the doll again. She was staring unblinkingly at him. "What?" Hector nearly shouted. Seemingly unaffected, the doll turned back to facing the front of the bus. He looked around. The bum was still asleep, and the woman had begun to read a book. The bus went up a ramp heading into the upper highway. Self-driving hover cars roomed alongside the bus. The tunnel-like highway was dark, with the upper speedway overhead. The highway was washed by orange lighting in the ceiling. The only natural light came from the Pacific Ocean. It whizzed by in front of pillars holding up the two speedways. The water was blue, the light of the sun sparkling off of it. Hector didn't like the doll, not one bit. He bit his nail. Could he do a dive? For a moment, like his hesitation at the bus entrance, he paused. The net was the last place he really wanted to be. It might be risky. Prowler AI were no doubt combing the local data region of the net looking for him. It was risky, but he had to dive and understand something. He glanced over at the doll. Yes, his fool's curiosity was acting up. He activated his halo. He remembered the first time someone with a halo described the process of using it. The person couldn't quite describe it. When Hector got his halo, he could understand why that person couldn't get the right words. How do you describe breathing? How do you describe walking and standing up? You could use simple words, yes, to convey your description, but then you could never truly paint the complex lines and patterns that went into it. Having had the halo for a few years now, he equated the question to asking, "How do you think?" The simple answer. It was something he could just do. His HUD, heads-up display, activated, creating an almost white clear border around his vision. In the top right was a GPS readout. Below that was a digital clock slowly ticking away the seconds. In the left of his view was a scrolling readout of old news articles dedicated to Titan Industries, one of the many members of the PAX consortium. Titan was formerly a military production company for the United Greece government. They'd severed ties with their old country after the government collapsed under lack of strong leadership and economic decline in the earlier 2080s, becoming a full member of the consortium 19 years ago. Hector pushed that away. It disappeared from his vision. Still looking at the doll, he took a mental picture. This would have been much easier if he had cybernetic eyes. Any mental picture he took might come out blurry. Fletcher said mental pictures ended up like that due to the brain creating a subjective imbalance when sharing the picture. Essentially, the halo part of the brain was taking a factual picture, but most of the brain was still flesh and remembered things the way the person wanted, causing the imbalance. Cybernetic eyes could have held onto the image better. He took a breath and sat back in his seat. He and Fletcher liked to get comfortable, completely submerging themselves into a dive. Hector couldn't do that. Not here. He still felt uneasy around the doll. He took another breath and dived. For a moment he felt a sensation like falling, before feeling some resistance that didn't feel discomforting in any way. His body felt at ease, yet, because he was still conscious and the doll was next to him, he felt uncomfortable all at the same time. In his mind's eye he saw the HyperNet, the digital scape of the Isru's quantum network. Fletcher said everyone saw the net different from each other. The human brain needed some way to compartmentalize the vast amounts of inhuman data being presented to it. For Hector and Fletcher, the net was like a vast, gloomy sea. The near-limitless code appeared like schools of fish. Data hubs appeared like small stars. Within the net, he saw people, other divers, who appeared like birds. Each one was unique. Color, size, and shape couldn't constrain them. Non-divers, people who used public terminals, holophones, or personal computers, appeared like shooting stars, dashing across the blue, murky void without care or reason. They could not control their speed or trajectory the way a diver could. Hector pitied them, for they could never experience the sheer wonder and feeling of diving. He spotted a data current, a flowing string like twisting cord of data that faded off into the net. Riding currents were the way divers got around the net. He went to it and rode it. The sensation tingled through his body. After a moment or so, he got off of the current. He was in a different part of the net. The color of the world had a kind of blue-green glow, like the clouds of a celestial nebula. It was a diver's signature. Blue meant there was a forum where divers could speak without Consortium Watch, Dog AI looking on. He found the forum, which manifested itself as a light blue star. He went into it and found himself somewhere else. Hector and Fletcher visited this forum often. For Hector, the forum took on the appearance of a small auditorium that was all white from floor to ceiling. Hector hadn't been back since breaking into the Consortium's data storage. On the steps of the auditorium, he saw other divers. They were in small number today, about a dozen. They perched themselves on the steps talking with each other. Hector took center stage. "Hey guys," he announced to the room. All attention turned on him. Holy shit, it's Hex. Hector was still off-put by the voices that came. It was like imagining a conversation in your head, only it wasn't you who controlled the outcome of the talking. The person who spoke up was an old friend of his and Fletcher's, a diver who went by the alias Fox. He was the host of this particular forum. To Hector, Fox took on the form of a dog-like man with glowing green fur. Fox came over to him, and they gave each other a high five. Waves from Fox's pulse ebbed out of him. Hector felt his fear before he said anything. "Dude, what the hell are you doing here? And is Fish okay? He just wigged out the other day." Hector did his best to hold back any of his own waves. Fox was a good guy. If he sniffed something was wrong, he might want to help, and he could end up like Fletcher. Fish. He's fine, just walking around and fell." Fox's avatar folded his arms unconvinced. "Dude, we both know that's bullshit, and trying to hide your waves isn't helping either. What happened? Last time you two were here, you were talking about this big bust or something you found." A wave of nervousness ebbed out of Fox. "Dude, what have you gotten yourself into?" Hector physically tapped his foot. Fish is dead." Fox's arms dropped. Hector finally let it all flow out of him. I found this stuff in the Consortium data storage. We almost got caught, and me and Fish thought that was the—" "Dude, shut up. I don't want to know any more than what I know now. You fucked with the Consortium, man. The fuck were you thinking?" Hector physically rubbed his face. "It all happened so fast, we didn't even think we'd find anything." "Dude, you got to get the hell out of town. Hell, you got to get the hell off the net. What the hell are you even doing here?" It's okay. I'm getting off the island as we speak." He looked out of the window. The bus was rising up onto the speedway in the upper layer. That's not right, he thought quietly for a fraction of a second before his attention was diverted by the dive. Multitasking wasn't always the best with a partial halo enhancement like his. "Dude, I have this uncle. He sounds like he's from the old country, but he's sorta cool. He has this shipping truck. I could—" "Thanks, but you shouldn't even be involved at all." "Then why do a dive? How do you know you ain't being followed?" "Look, I didn't come to worry." "Well, I'm probably about to worry you. Look, I'm on this bus leading out of Central, and there's this freaky doll next to me." In his hand, he brought up his image of the doll. Like Hector thought, the flat image that appeared was hazy, but you could make out some features, mainly the striking white hair. "It's some kind of Andy, but one I've never seen or heard of before. I thought you might be able to help." Fox took the image. In his mind, it felt like something had been plucked, leaving a small, cold void on the side of his brain. Fox tossed the image into the air, and it enlarged until it enveloped the entire room, the picture becoming the face of the walls, ceilings, and steps. "Listen up, gents." The divers in the Forum turned to look at him. "Have any of you ever seen a doll like this? What the hell is this? Never seen anything like it. Looks like a shoe. Is it a shoe?" To Hector, the Forum erupted with the flapping wing and squawks of a dozen wild birds. "Oh crap, I've seen a pic of something like this." The room changed, turning white again before another picture took over the room. He brought up the image and found it was a picture of a war zone. The picture looked like it had been taken with a camera. The horizon was a bleak battlefield of dirt, bomb-gutted buildings, and over it all a gloomy gray sky. Hector didn't see the significance until he saw something near the right of the picture. At the base of one of the buildings was a doll. Its hair was singed and blackened, its dress scorched and ruined, and its breastless, bullet-riddled chest left exposed. But Hector could tell, with no doubt, as he looked over to the other side of the bus aisle, that the Andy in the picture and the doll next to him were splitting images. Hector ebbed out waves of fear into the Forum. "Oh shit, man, do you know what that is?" "A shoe. Seriously, am I the only one who thought that last picture looked like a shoe?" "You're an idiot, you know that." "We stopped looking at that picture so long ago." "Fuck you, dweeb. Who even says dweeb anymore?" The 1990s called. They want their weak insults back. Fox waved his hands, ending all but the diver with the relevant information. "Mute." "Dude, speak up. What is this thing?" "My man, what you see before you is an Izvadla walking explosive device. Ever heard of the doll war?" "Wait a minute," Hector said. "Did you say walking explosive device?" "Yay. These guys in northern Russellia used to make robot dolls, then send them along the roads to blow up their enemies." "Lol, freaky stuff, right?" "I'm in a bus with one right now." Hector let his wave of dread come out. Wow. All I can recommend is that you don't make eye contact and don't let it notice you. Godspeed, fellow." With that, the diver, who appeared to Hector like a yellow crystal crane, flapped its wings and vanished, returning back into the wider net. Hector quickly glanced at the doll. It sat peacefully with its hands folded on its lap. "Fox, what in the hell do I do?" "Can't you get off?" "No, I'm on the speedway." "In the upper layer?" "Yay." "Why are you on the upper layer speedway? That doesn't get you out of town." Hector looked out of the window again. He had been too caught up in the dive to truly notice what was going on around him. The bus was indeed on the upper speedway. Crisp, state-of-the-art hover cars sped by on their way to the city. New Babylon stood at the heart of the upper layer. The city was a shining jewel against the bright day. The buildings stood high and strong, like a white castle against a blue sky. From his point on, the speedway, the massive consortium tower loomed high like a black knife jutting up from the ground. Beyond that, standing even greater in the distance on the great steel island east of Isru, was the Pax Consortium's greatest monument, the orbital elevator, Babel. It rose hundreds of thousands of meters into the air, a wide, crisscrossing tower web of black nanocarbon steel. Passing clouds floated aimlessly through its struts. It wasn't even a third of the way complete, but it was always a marvel to behold. The problem seeing it was that Hector wasn't supposed to. This bus was supposed to take him to Chinatown on the other side of the mid-layer. Then he remembered. Earlier, when he first stepped onto the bus's onboard AI glitched out for a moment. Someone must have hacked the controls and was driving him who knows where. It was them. How did they find him? His heartbeat rose. He could barely register Fox talking to him in the Forum. "Dude, hey, what's wrong?" "Dude?" I'm picking up some weird waves. He rummaged through his bag until he found the gun. Grasping its handle, he thought he might feel a small sense of relief, but instead it filled him with terror. As though by grabbing hold of the weapon, he was inviting his would-be killer to finally attack. His pulse sent out waves, and in the forum, Fox felt every one. Dude, put that thing away. If they find out you have that, what can they do to me? He spoke hushly through clenched teeth. He gripped the gun tighter in his hand. I'm already as good as dead anyway. You should listen to your ally. The voice was like a cold finger gliding across his brain. In the forum, Fox looked around. The voice had seemed to come from everywhere. Dude, what in the name of God was the... Hector felt a rush. Blood pumped through his veins and his brain felt untethered, lost. The image of the forum in his mind's eye faded. A forced ascent, he thought. As he came out of the dive, his brain ached. He bent forward in his seat, holding his head. You should not dive anymore. It brings too much attention to yourself. The voice from the forum, it was still in his head, and what more it was coming from right next to him as well. Hector looked over to see the doll looking at him again. Forgive me for the forced intervention, but... The doll's mouth didn't move as it spoke. The Titan agent sent to terminate your life has been monitoring your dive ever since submergence. If you stayed connected any longer, I estimated a 70% chance the agent would use a virus AI to trap you in the data hub and eliminate you there. Hector felt as though he could die at any moment. What? What are you? Sheesh, none, said a new voice. The young boy sitting next to the doll sat up straight, revealing his face. He had sharp gray eyes and a thick brow. Limp, messy, dark blonde hair fell short to his shoulders, and his nose had a straight incline to it. He wore a brown leather jacket that seemed like it came from 1980s fashion. White button shirt, blue jeans, and black glossy shoes. I told you not to startle him. I estimated a 70% chance the agent would use a virus AI to... Yay, none. I got all that, but the agent's probably listening to everything happening, and if he's smart, he'll activate these goons, the boy thumbed back, to do his dirty work for him. Hector looked back. The bum in the back had gotten up. To Hector's shock, the man wasn't a man at all. It was an android with dark green skin. 2 blank white spots for eyes sat over a mouthless face. Its skin looked like rubber, stretched tight over its inner frame. The brown overcoat it wore had hidden its green, sexless body. The android took a confident stride down the aisle. Kid, you still got that gun, right? The boy said in a laid-back fashion. Dumbfounded, Hector pulled the gun free for all to see. Is it loaded? Hector nodded. He'd made sure to load it this morning, but he hadn't thought he needed it. Good, none. He addressed the doll and motioned his head back to the strange green android who was only a few feet away now. Understood, the doll said, getting up and snatching the gun from Hector's hand. She aimed the gun, lining up the sights before firing 2 successive shots. The gunfire exploded near his ear. He flinched, but his eyes remained locked on the scene. The shots punctured the android's chest, causing it to stagger back for a moment, leaving 2 smoking bullet holes in the overcoat, but not stopping its pace. The android reached out, grabbing the doll by her neck, and squeezed. Hector heard a cracking sound. He saw flaws in the doll's skin appear, cracking their way up the neck to the bottom of her chin. The doll's face was emotionless as it was lifted up. The doll pulled up her arm and fired 4 more rounds into the android's chest. In cold retaliation, the android threw the doll into the window. The glass shattered, and the doll was sent out of sight onto the speedway, wind flaring through the broken window. The android turned to Hector. It took a step forward, reaching out when a bullet went rocketing through the side of its skull. It fell onto Hector, lifeless. The skin felt strange, real somehow. He'd never touched an android before. Did they all feel like that? He pushed it away in disgust before getting up and going to the window. The boy, who had ducked down through most of the affair, got up to see what was outside. The doll stood, one leg dented into the hood while the other braced against the windshield of the black hover car that drove parallel with the bus. Glass shards sparkling in her whipping hair and dress, and silver gun raised and aimed. The driver and passenger of the hover car gaped from behind a partly tinted windshield. "Yay!" Hector yelled out, punching the air. The doll did a little curtsy, raising the seams of her dress. Something grabbed Hector from behind. He choked and kicked the seat in front of him, unable to breathe. The doll brought up the gun and fired 2 rounds. The first round ricocheted off the side window. The second round hit whatever was holding Hector with a wet slap, loosening its grip enough for him to breathe. Hector tore away from the grasp, looking back to see the old Japanese woman sitting in the seat behind him. She had a blank, emotionless face. The doll jumped from the hover car back into the bus. She grabbed hold of the old lady's arm. The old lady swatted her away, sending her to the other side of the bus where she hit the opposite window, cracking it before falling awkwardly onto the seats. The old lady turned back to Hector. Rising, she reached down for him. The boy stood up. From his hip he brandished a revolver. He fired a round into the center of the woman's chest. The woman jerked, staggering out into the aisle. He fired a second time and she went further back. He fired one last time, getting her close to the bus's rear secondary exit. "I think this is your stop," he said just before kicking her through the doors, where she tumbled into traffic, hitting a number of hover cars. The boy turned around, returning his revolver to its holster at his hip in a stylish cowboy fashion, twirling it and placing it back in one graceful motion. He looked at his android companion. "None? You okay?" The doll pushed herself off the seat, hitting the ground with a thud. She rose, looking at her hands and dress. She looked wrecked. Her white skin had been splintered and broken like fractured glass around the neck. The top of her left hand was cut open, revealing the black underworkings of her skeleton. After inspecting herself, the doll looked to the boy. "I am in functioning capacity. All current damage is superficial." The boy came up to her. He moved her head around with his hand on her chin, inspecting her face. He sighed. "Your skin's fractured. I'll have to take you in for clean-up after this." He snorted. "Norman's going to love this." "On the contrary, Norman enjoys replastering my shell. He has said so on numerous occasions. It is you he finds uninteresting." He spoke so calmly about her damage, almost uncaringly. Who were these people? The doll tilted its head to look at Hector. "Are you harmed?" The voice was no longer in his head, but was coming from just the doll. Hector nodded. His neck still felt sore, but otherwise he was fine. "Who are you?" "Who am I?" The boy stepped forward. His old shoes seemed to pierce metal under it with its touch. "Who are you, kid? You're the one who asked us for help." He left because he felt a pulse ebbing out of the net. It followed him when he dove, haunting him with its familiar scent. The day before now he had been in a dive, searching for information about Titan, and there it had been, waiting. "I didn't call for help," Hector said. He'd gotten up, moving to the front of the bus. "I think I'd remember." "Someone called," the doll said, waves from a pulse found in the net. "And then she woke me from my sleep," the boy said. "I have to say this whole affair is completely uncalled for. Hell, I doubt I'm even getting paid for this. I rarely do pro bono. You should be grateful, kid." "But I didn't call." Fear and regret burst out of him like a broken fire hydrant. "I didn't call." "Settle down." The boy spoke with a strength that seemed beyond him. "Whether you called for help or not, The fact of the matter is that you need help now. I suggest you take it and stop complaining." Hector sat down, the wave of fear leaving him near empty. He was right, those androids were gunning for him. Sooner or later they would have attacked. If the two of them hadn't been here, Hector didn't know if he would have been able to fire the gun, let alone hit anything. When he and Fletcher first trained with the gun, he had missed every single one of the practice bottles. "Don't be afraid of the bang," Fletcher said. They'd been at the hangout. Bottles had been stacked onto a table that they'd found in an alley a block away. Fletcher was helping him aim. "It's not like you don't know it's coming, and it'll always be there regardless." "All right," Hector said, letting out a long sigh and looking at him. "What do we do?" "First you tell us why we're here. I haven't had a decent night of sleep in 2 days looking for you." He could tell. The boy looked drained. The bags under his eyes made him look like a zombie. Hector rubbed his hands together before speaking. "A few days ago, me and a friend of mine were divvying and got into the consortium data storage." "The consortium," the boy cut in with a sigh. "Why am I not surprised they have something to do with this? Sorry for interrupting. Continue." "Did the boy have some bad deal with the consortium?" It didn't matter. The boy's problems didn't seem like they were a major for him. After finding his place in the story again, he started talking. I found a comms link. It was open, and I recorded the whole thing. The link was between a ranking member of the consortium, the vice president of Titan Industries, and some underling named Stanton. It seems as though— Wait, said the boy. "You said you recorded this whole thing, right?" Hector nodded. "Is it legible? If someone showed this in court, could it be refuted in any way?" "I don't think so." "Show me." From his pocket the boy removed a phone. It was old, somewhat bulky. He removed a cord at the base of the phone, extending it, and handed the plug to Hector. "Your Halo enhancement has an interface option, right?" Hector nodded. "But no one uses physical connections anymore." "I do. Just jack in and show me what you have." Hector scowled at the boy as he moved the plug to the thin outlet at the back base of his skull. No one used wire connections anymore to connect thoughts. It was an outdated system, archaic. Hector found the outlet and plugged it in. He made a short huff as he saw a rainbow of color at the edges of his vision. The touch of the plug in his brain was cold. He brought up his HUD. He did a quick mental search of his brain, found the recording, and brought it up. On the boy's old phone, a hollow image of the recording popped up. Tinted in a blue haze, the image showed a single man. Next to him, on the left side of the screen, was a black space. The single man was a scrawny, pasty blonde with short-cut hair that smoothed over to his right. He wore a white button shirt, and though the image cropped out the lower part of his body, Hector was certain it was tucked in. It was clear the man was in some closed office. In the background, you could see a fern in the corner. The boy smirked. "You never said it was audio and visual recording." The boy's eyebrow went up. "The guy looks like he's just some cubicle mouse. Most consortium executives tend to dress a lot nicer, so I can only assume this is— Who'd you say, Stanton? The underling?" Hector nodded. He closed his eyes and played the recording. Hector had come into the link while they were partway into their meeting. "All set," Stanton said, dabbing his glistening forehead with a handkerchief. "Forward Dynamics will receive the shipment of carbon tubing in a few days." "Good," said another voice. The voice was scrambled and modulating, coming out squeaky and low at times. "Do they suspect anything?" "No, Vice President." "Don't say my name, you dolt. Even if this line is restricted, I don't want to take any chances, Stanton." The cubicle worker looked away, ashamed. "I'm sorry, sir. Playing corporate spy doesn't seem to be my forte." "Well, you won't have to do it for long." After Babel falls, the consortium will expel Forward Dynamics, and then Titan will... Wait, what? I thought you said the link was secure. Sir, Stanton looked puzzled. The line's been compromised. We're being watched, you damn fool. On the screen, Stanton turned, looking around the room as though it was bugged. This is your mess, Stanton. Yours. Fix it. The last image was of a frightened Stanton rising out of his seat. Hector pulled the plug from his head. The cord quickly recoiled back into the boy's old holophone. The boy rubbed his chin, which had hits of stubble growing. So, this Titan business is doing something to Babel. Oh, the consortium won't like that. Tell me, why haven't you tried to sell this? Hector looked at the ground. Broken glass shards litter the floor of the bus. I wanted to, but my friend, Fletcher, he was with me when I found and recorded the link. Thought it was a bad idea. He said that if we tried to go to any of the corporations with this, we'd be left for dead when they had the data. He sighed. Really, it was me. I didn't know what to do with it. Days later, my friend was murdered. Killed during a dive with a virus that overloaded his brain. Your friend was probably right, the boy said, slipping the phone into his jacket pocket. But I suppose it doesn't matter. We know who's driving this bus, Stanton. Now we just have to figure out where he's taking us. Why does that matter? Hector asked. It matters because this bus got onto the speedway for a reason. The speedway only travels through the upper layer exclusively and... His eyes widened. He went into his pocket and brought out what looked like some kind of breathing mask made out of metal. None, he said, looking to the doll as he put on the mask. Tune us all into a secure encrypted comms link. The mask covered the lower part of his face, from the bridge of his nose down to his chin, leaving his eyes exposed. The doll's eyes twitched for a moment. Comms link established. The doll's soft voice came from inside his head again. Testing, testing. The boy's voice was coming from in his head as well. Can you hear me all right, kid? The boy's mouth was obscured by the mask. Hector could tell by some of the faint muscle pulls of his face that he was talking under it, but Hector couldn't physically hear him. Sorry, I don't mean to scare you or anything, but I wanted to make sure Stanton couldn't hear us. Hector wasn't sure how to respond. The boy rolled his eyes. Just think. Talk the way you do in a diver. Hector swallowed the lump in his throat. Hello. Reading you loud and clear. The boy gave him the OK sign. This feels weird. What, divers don't comm link with each other? Not when we're physically near one another, it's just weird. The boy shrugged. As I was saying, Stanton is taking us somewhere only the upper layer speedway can get us. When we get to where he's taking us, we need to be ready. How do you know he isn't just going to run us off the road? Realizing what he was saying, he could feel a wave of fear ebb out of him. He wondered if the boy would feel it, but he didn't seem to react. The doll, however, glanced in his direction. A hover bus like this is expensive, and judging by the way he fought up with his superior, he wouldn't want to draw any more undue attention onto himself. A bus accident would cause a scene and leave too many witnesses to handle. My honest guess is that he wants to know everything you know before he gets rid of you. I thought he just wanted me dead. Hector couldn't see his mouth, but he could tell the boy had smirked. If he wanted you dead so spectacularly, he wouldn't have gone to the liberty of prearranging the android snatch squad. They felt like they wanted me dead. He rubbed the reddish mark that still burned around his neck. The boy shook his head. They had capture orders. If they really wanted you dead, they could have easily overpowered you from the start. They would have gotten me if it wasn't for you. How did you find me anyway? How'd you know I'd be on this particular bus? He chuckled. Next time you book a bus ride, make sure you don't search for it using your real name. Hector slapped his face. It was such an obvious slip-up. He'd been in a panic, not really thinking. We'd been looking for you for days and knew you were in trouble. I figured you might try and skip town somehow, so I had none tracking all public transit routes. We discovered you'd scheduled a pickup earlier this morning. In the end, we got on a few blocks away. Stanton probably found you the same way. Those androids got on after we did. And now we're here, Hector mused. And now we're here, the boy echoed. A silence came between them, punctuated by the wind still rushing through the bus. So what do we do? The boy looked to the doll. None. Dive. See if you can't break into the Transit Authority database and find out where we're headed. The doll nodded. She looked straight ahead to the front of the bus, her eyes twitching as she initiated the dive. Suddenly, her head began to twitch wildly until she stopped, coming back to normal. The android glanced at her partner. I am blocked from accessing the net. How, the kid had no issues before, the boy said, rubbing his chin. There seems to be some sort of quantum disruption device implanted within the vehicle. The device must have been recently activated. I shall begin a sweep. Don't bother, said the boy. I'll handle this myself. He stood and went to the front of the bus. Bending down where the hollow AI had appeared, he pulled free the paneling near the front, exposing wires and cords. He began to tinker with the controls. As he did, Hector took a moment to inspect the doll. She was beautiful. She was so lifelike, but the cracks in her skin revealed that her outer layer was all artificial. Made of some sort of thin shell, it looked as brittle as porcelain, but it had withstood so much stress, the plaster couldn't have been made with common materials. The doll noticed his staring and glanced at him. Is there a problem? No, I was just... Never mind. His thoughts began to wander, and he thought of what she'd said earlier. You said you found me by a pulse. What did you mean by that? She turned her head to look at him directly. At approximately 11:22 a.m., July 12th, 2107, I received waves emanating from the net. On further investigation, I discovered a pulse hidden in the deep net. It said things. What do you mean it said things? It is complex to describe in human terms, but to put it simply, it said it was afraid, alone, and confused. It also said that it needed to help someone. It directed me toward you before disappearing into a school of passing data. Hector thought of the eerie pulse lingered. Even now, up in the real world, its ethereal tendrils squirmed at his back. Who did the pulse belong to? Unknown, the pulse was independent, wild. It did not follow the expected mannerisms associated with a rational mind. In concordance with all known parameters, I came to the conclusion that I was speaking to a spirit. His heart nearly burst. You mean a ghost, apparition, a specter. These are all correct names to describe what I witnessed. That's impossible. I mean, I've heard urban legends about guys who've died in a dive, but no one's ever found proof. Are you sure you just didn't find some kind of malfunctioning AI? The doll turned to look at the ground. That possibility did not occur to me, but even the most sophisticated artificial intelligence cannot produce artificial waves in the net, and so a counter-argument. Hector's eyebrow went up. Was he really dealing with an android? My experience with the entity was indeed with that of a spirit wishing to save you. Its actions and attempt to hide are indicators that it is unsure of its new location. That doesn't sound like a good counter-argument. You basically just repeated yourself. The doll looked back at him. In retrospect, I cannot deny your statement. However, it does not dissuade me from my earlier comment. Reviewing all relevant data collected through my personal perspective, I must conclude I spoke to a spirit with your best interest as its core motivation. Hector regretted asking anything. Aren't AI supposed to be logical? Yes, but I have been told on numerous occasions by respected AI coders that I am not. Got it, the boy shouted, unhooking his holophone cord from the bus's inner workings. We're headed to an old warehouse district in the southern docks. Kid, do you have any idea the kind of people we're going against? Hector told them about what he'd found on Titan Industries. The boy rubbed his chin. Weapons manufacture. He shrugged, grabbing something from under the front seats. It was a 5-foot-long, slender black trunk. In its obscured area at the front, Hector hadn't noticed it coming in. If things get bad, at least we have this. I informed you bringing that device would be unnecessary. How long have you known me, Nun? About. Don't answer that. He glanced grimly at Hector for a moment. Have you ever known me to walk into a situation completely blind? Yes, I have logged many occasions. The boy glared at the doll. That's only when the situation didn't call for sincerity. I had a feeling this time called for it. The boy looked at Hector, patting the trunk. Trust me. Kid, do you have any more bullets for that dinky gun of yours? He had a full box left of ammunition in his bag. He nodded. Good, Nun. Give him his gun back. Kid, load it up. We'll be at the warehouse in about an hour. I want us primed and ready before that. Time passed. Traffic moved around them as the sun began to set. The boy had gone to the front of the bus to close his eyes, with his arms folded across his chest. Hector felt like he was going to war as he put bullets into his gun clip. He couldn't lie. Though fear was seizing him all over, he couldn't shake the excitement building in him. As he put the last round into the clip and loaded his weapon, he caught sight of the doll. The sun was beginning to wane in the sky. New Babylon's buildings were black silhouettes against the orange sun. The wind that was cold earlier was now kissed warm by the sunset. The doll sat in the seat she'd been in when Hector had first stepped onto the bus. She looked out of the window towards the city, her hair being blown about behind her. In the glare of the sunlight, she almost looked human. Hey, Hector said physically. The bus turned off the speedway, heading down a spiraling ramp. The doll turned to look at him. He got up from the floor and sat down in his original seat next to her. Why do you think that pulse you talked to was a spirit? The sun glinted off her eyes. A lost soul that has not found the grace of God is a spirit, doomed to wander the face of the earth for eternity. These were the words taught to me in the Church of Forgotten Wanderers. Hector Alvrius, I cannot force you to come to the same conclusions I have, and it seems apparent that I cannot persuade you. All I can say is that it is within my power to conclude what I see, because that is what I have come to hold. I don't understand. Are you saying? You believe in God? She looked at him, face expressionless and eyes wide. I am a nun. The warehouse district was a maze of rusted buildings. The area hadn't been used much since the construction of the upper layer nearly 27 years ago. They stood like red monuments to a bygone era in Isru's past, when the man-made island was a vision of hope. What it was now, Hector couldn't say. The bus hovered through the road between the buildings, passing by shipping containers and the shadowed cry of seagulls overhead. They were all crouched to the ground, the boy with his revolver at the ready, his back pressed against the metal under the exposed window. The doll with her fingertips right on the skin of the black case's handle. Hector breathed shakily, trying to stop his hands from shaking. The bus turned a corner and pulled up to the front of a warehouse's gate. The gate screeched up. The boy spun the cylinder of his revolver, checking to see all the bullets loaded into a chamber. Here we go, he whispered. The boy put his mask back on just as the bus went forward into the dark of the warehouse. From here on out, we keep to comms link chat. Hector nodded. Understood. Nun gripped her hand around the case. The bus stopped inside. The gate behind them began to close, and with it the sunlight of outside. The inside of the warehouse was vast. There were 4 levels going up, each one holding 1,000 or more rectangular shipping containers. The bus had stopped in an open area of the warehouse just in front of the first level of containers. The gate behind them closed, sending a boom that echoed deeply throughout the warehouse. Hector bit his lip to make the fear go away. It helped little, and then the front and back doors of the bus opened. The boy pushed himself up the wall to peek over the side of the window. There was nothing to see but darkness and shadows. He looked to Noon and Hector. "This is our stop. We're getting off the bus now, or else we'll be sitting ducks. I'll draw Stanton's fire while you two get to a better position." "You want to split up," Hector said, terrified, finding himself whispering into the comms link. "Isn't that like the worst thing you can do in a scary movie?" "Humph, of course, but then not every scary movie has me as its hero." With that, he jumped over the side of the window, his retreating footsteps echoing out into the warehouse. "That guy's crazy," Hector whispered physically to Noon. "But why do I have this shaky feeling I should put my faith in him?" Noon didn't answer. After a moment, she stood up with her case hoisted effortlessly behind her shoulder. "Time to go," she said before hopping over the window the same as the boy and disappearing into the darkness, her feet pitter-pattering into the distance. Hector took a quick breath, forcing himself to his legs. He jumped out of the window. His feet hit the ground hard, clapping the cement floor with a cold echo that sent a chill running down his spine. He fell forward but quickly picked himself up. It was near pitch black and he lost sight of the doll. He made his way forward regardless. As he ran, he was annoyingly reminded of his echoing footsteps. He hit something in the dark. At first he thought it was a person, but as his eyes began to adjust, he realized it was a steel beam. He was in between 2 shipping container rows. He moved more cautiously now, perking his ears up to any noises. Just then he heard gunfire, 2 shots exploding like thunder in the dark, but there didn't seem to be a reprisal. His heart pounded like a drum in his chest. The guns sounded like the boys. Was he engaging more androids? He reached the end of the container and turned the corner, gun raised. He saw nothing down the rows of containers. Then he heard a noise like cracking stone. "Hector Alvarez," a voice echoed over a loudspeaker. Hector looked around, trying to see where the voice came from, but it came from everywhere. "This is all your fault. I was on my way to the top, but you had to be so nosy. It will take me years to get back my standing." "Stay cool, Hector," the boy said over the comms link. "I have a plan. Just stay out of that guy's way for now." "Easy for you to say. You don't have a crazy office worker gunning for you." He checked another corner, nothing but darkness. He heard that sound again. This time it sounded like screeching metal. He heard it again and again, rising in tempo, gnarling, gnashing metal, screeching and bending. It was coming from above. He looked up in time to see a shadow come crashing down to the floor in front of him. The crash broke the stone floor beneath them. Hector was instantly blinded. All he could see were 2 bright lights like the headlights of a car. Hector tried to aim his gun while he shielded his eyes with the other arm. "Mr. Alvarez, I'm going to enjoy killing you just like I did with your friend." Something took him. Anger overcame fear like a looming tidal wave. He stared into the lights and fired his gun like Fletcher had showed him, shooting one of the headlights black. Just then, the warehouse lights came on. Before him was a tan, boxy-shaped mech suit. It stood 4 meters high. It had a Gatling gun for a right arm. Its left arm was a slim, rectangular box. On its front was the Titan Industries logo, a fist grasping a flame. The head was slightly off to the right on top of the boxy torso and had a glowing orange V-shaped visor. "Ah!" Stanton screamed. The mech lurched back. The rectangular box on the side parted open, revealing a long, skinny mechanical arm that came to block the mech's visor. Hector shook himself out of his shock and ran forward. Sliding between the machine's legs, he reached its back. On the back of the mech, he saw a smaller box pod that looked just big enough to hold a human. That must be Stanton, he thought angrily. The mech recovered fast. Turning around, it fired its Gatling gun. Hector heard the clash of pinging bullets on container walls as he turned the corner of a container. Then he heard the crunching, like he'd heard before, only quickening in haste. The mech came around the corner, bashing the container next to it over to fit into the narrow pathway. It fired its gun again, and again Hector leapt into another narrow pathway, sliding across the floor. He scrambled to his feet and ran. The stacked containers made for an excellent maze. He turned corners and doubled back, but all the while he could hear Stanton and his mech tearing down the containers in his path. Hector turned a corner and found the path blocked by dented and ripped containers. "He's boxing me in," he said to himself in disbelief. "He's boxing me in," he yelled over the comms link. "Shit," the boy said over the link. "Try and stall him until me or none find you." Stall him. Hector could hear the crash of another container. Hector began to run. "He's in a military mech. How do I do that?" "You're a diver, right? See if you can't hack his mech's controls." That was easier said than done. Hector found himself at another dead end. He cursed under his breath. He turned around and ran back the other way. The mech came into view, blocking his path. It turned and faced him with an easy slowness. Stanton's laugh was like a hyena's. "You're mine, Mr. Alvarez," Stanton said before raising his gun. Hector heard the whine of the gun barrel spin before the small burst of fire that preceded the bullet. Just then, a shadow blocked his view. It was the doll. As the bullets from the mech's gun fired, the doll stood between Hector and death, the black case working like a shield between her and the shower of bullets. As the case defended against the bullets, the doll glanced over her shoulder. "Are you harmed?" Hector checked himself. He was fine. He nodded. "Good." She turned back to the case. "In approximately 6 seconds, I will open fire on the Titan Industries Urban Combat Mechanized Armor. In that time, you will have 10 seconds to dive into the enemy armor and initialize shutdown." "What are you talking about? I can't do that." "The spirit told me it was possible." "The ghost?" "Decide your fate, Hector Alvarez. Is this where you meet God?" The mech's Gatling gun spun to a stop, the barrel red-hot and cooling with steam. "Sequence!" The doll kicked the case forward, opening it. From it, she pulled a gun twice as long as her and took aim. The mech took a step back. "Is that," Stanton yelled, "a mini flak cannon?" "Initialized." Click. She pulled the trigger. A new shower of bullets spewed forth from her gun's long barrel. Thunder roared out like rain. Shells ejecting out of the side chamber and pounded the side of the containers before clanging to the floor. The force of the gunfire blew air up her skirt and made her hair flare back like she was in a wind tunnel. The mech shielded it, head with its gun arm. 7 seconds, she reminded. Hector shook his head before instantly diving into the net. The mech was military issue. Most war machines shipped off Isru had a vestigial link to the net. Manufacturers used these links to tether armies to the consortium by using the quantum network to digitally update and monitor the devices for malfunction or unofficial tampering. Hector dove through the net. He found a data current and wrote it to the consortium's data storage, where this all began. He mentally cursed when he realized all of the holes in the defensive layer had been patched up. He quickly searched for an open hole but found nothing. In the physical world, 2 seconds had passed. There was no sneaking through. He'd have to break in. If he had more time, he would have preferred a more subtle approach, but with another quarter of a second coming up, he had no choice. He ripped into the barrier. Instantly, Attack Hound AI became active. Hector could feel them pressing down on him, but he managed to break through to the inner layer. Watchdog AI waited, appearing to him like flat, diamond-like creatures with a single eye in the center. He ignored them. Watchdog AI were harmless. Another second passed. The net took on a red pulsing hue, and he felt a low thumbing in the back of his head that could only be a net equivalent of an alarm. He fought his way deeper into the inner layers of the consortium's data defense, dodging attack hound AI and skirting past the closing firewalls. Eventually, he found what he was looking for, an open link near where he and Fletcher first found Stanton's link. It was the link from the Titan Industries data hub to the mech. Hector went to it, but was caught off guard by a quick attack hound. It tore into him, causing waves of pain to ebb out of him. On the physical plane, his body began to twitch, and his nose bled as his eyes rolled to the back of his head. In that instant, he could not be sure if what he felt was pain, discomfort, or something even worse. All of his body was acting out, alive with their own will and direction. When the pain became so great that he didn't think he could take it, it ended. As he gasped physically for air, he saw something in his mind's eye. It was a fish. It bit into the attack hound AI, shattering it like glass. It watched him for a moment. A white fish with glinting silver scales. It swam off into the shrouded veil of the net. There were only 3 seconds left. He acted, quickly getting to the data hub. In the real world, the doll's gun spun dry. She looked at it the way one would look at a pair of shoes. "Empty," she said. The mech removed its gun arm from its head. Stanton growled, "You damn robot! I don't know who you are, but you're as dead as him." The mech aimed its gun, the barrel screeching into a high-pitched spin. "Got it," Hector said. The mech's long, retractable arm came out of its casing and punched the mech in the head. The mech staggered to the side as it fired its gun, wildly. A stream of bullets came at them. "Look out!" Without thinking twice, Hector jumped, knocking the doll over and blocking her with the top of his body. "Are you okay?" he asked as he moved from over her. "I am in functioning capacity." She rested on her knees. "You did not initiate shutdown." Hector stood, cracking the joints in his hand. "I didn't have time." The mech had caught itself on the back foot and was turning back to them again. All I could get was the arm. Hector used his control to grab hold of the mech's head with its retractable arms. In his real hand, he could feel the shape of the mech's head. "This is for Fletcher," he said to himself, slowly squeezing his hand. The mech hand, in response, began to squeeze as well. "What's happening? What's going on?" Stanton said, shooting wildly as the mech's head was slowly crushed, his shots only hitting the ceiling or the sides of containers. "And this one," Hector said, slowly closing his hand, "is for me." He balled his hand into a fist. The mech head burst into sparks like a small firework. "Damn you, I can't see!" The mech slammed into the side of a container. "Good," yelled the boy, who jumped from the top of one of the shipping containers and landed on the back pod of the thrashing mech. He pulled out his holophone and plugged it into the pod. After a few moments, the mech's gun spun down and went slack against its side. With a hiss, the back hatch of the pod opened. The boy whipped out his gun and pointed it at Stanton's head. "Touch those controls, and you'll see what the world looks like in all black." The sun was low on the horizon. Waves splashed up against the docks. Hector sat alone watching the Tower of Babel as it loomed dark and high in the distance. He'd done it. He'd avenged Fletcher's death, but part of him still felt empty. In the distance he heard the sound of chopper blades cutting the air. He looked up from the water to see a black helicopter land on the pier. The boy and the doll came from the warehouse with Stanton in tow. One look at the chopper and Stanton's eyes widened with true terror. From the chopper, a woman in red stepped onto the damp stone ground, along with a pair of faceless combat androids carrying assault rifles. Hector had seen dozens of pictures of androids like that on TV and the net. They were consortium androids, only seen on consortium tower grounds in the very heart of New Babylon. What was going on? Just then, the woman in red spotted Hector and gave a friendly wave. The red of her business suit was so vibrant she didn't seem real. She approached the boy with no name and the doll. Stanton was held at gunpoint by the boy. They seemed to talk to one another. Hector found himself walking and then jogging up to them. At his approach, the woman, a striking red head with piercing green eyes and pale skin, turned to him with a pleasant and inviting smile. "You must be the man of the hour," she said. Her voice felt like a soothing breeze. "It takes quite a human being to pull off what you did," she giggled. "You broke into our most secure data defenses in 11 seconds flat. Either our security is lacking or you're just that good. From what the captain here has told me, I have my suspicions that it's a bit of both." The boy coughed, catching the woman's attention. "What are you doing here?" "Isn't it obvious?" she smiled. "I'm here to collect Mr. Stanton." "What?" the boy said. Hector was also curious. She giggled again. "We've been long aware of some foul play in the heart of Titan Industries. Some weeks previous, a batch of faulty nanocarbon tubing went missing from one of our independent manufacturing factories in Detroit. I was made aware by the plant executive who wished to understand the legal ramifications of such an occurrence and if the plant was in jeopardy of damaging their standing with the consortium." She shook her head, pleased with herself for some reason. "Of course, I cannot discuss legal proceedings regarding the factory. My real concern was the faulty nanocarbon. I did not believe it was missed, placed like the executive thought it was. Instead, I looked to who was receiving the metal shipments that were not defective, and that brought my attention to Forward Dynamics, a weapons manufacturing company, and their pitted rivals, Titan Industries. It appears that a year ago, Forward Dynamics did some double dealing behind doors and acquired the rights to supply engineering staff as well as resources to the construction of Babel, away from Titan Industries." She looked at Stanton. To Hector, the pleasant smile on her face hid something more sinister. Titan Industries' plan was to slip the faulty nanocarbon in with the functional and sit back and wait for Forward Dynamics to take the blame. Subsequently, they would take over. Am I right, Mr. Stanton? "Oh, God, please don't kill me," the cubicle worker groveled. The woman in red laughed. "Oh, you are quite fine with me, Mr. Stanton. That is, of course, if you decide to cooperate with internal affairs on the matter of the faulty nanocarbon." She put her finger to her chin as though she were pondering a question. "It's come to our attention that you might be instrumental in finding the true culprit of this act." "True culprit," Hector said, taking a step. The assault android went to raise their guns, but a quick lift of the hand by the woman in red stayed them. "This man is the true culprit," he said, near laughing at the absurdity. "Oh, no," she shook her head. "This man is nothing but a pawn, placed in his position within Forward Dynamics to further the goals of those who lied to him." She was looking at Stanton, whose wide, fearful eyes began to brighten with hope. Yes, I was lied to. I didn't know what I was doing." "The hell!" Hector yelled. He thought of Fletcher lying dead in their hangout. The boy held him back. Hector looked to him. "Some battles you fight," the captain whispered. "Some battles you have no choice but to walk away from." The doll poked Stanton in the back and he made a slow walk forward. In that moment, Stanton could have looked anywhere, at anything, the ground, the sky, ocean. But instead, Stanton chose to look at Hector and smile. The sun was low on the horizon. The ocean waves splashed up against the docks, and in that moment Hector decided not to run away. He opened his comms link and said, "And some battles you embrace." Before anyone could act, Hector had already taken out his gun and fired every last remaining round into Stanton's back. Stanton hit the ground with a wet thud and let go of his last breath. Hector had expected to be on the ground next to him, to feel the sharp, ripping punch of bullets sear through his chest, but instead he looked at the woman in red and her armed escorts with their guns trained on him. He saw a shadow at his side and followed it until he saw both the doll and the boy with their guns aimed on the other side. The woman in red, whose hand was again up, holding back her escorts, looked neither angry or upset. She looked mildly amused. "Well, that was quite unexpected. The profile I read on you did not indicate a reaction of this type. I am, again, very surprised." "Let it go," the boy said. At first, Hector thought he was talking to him. It was too late. Stanton's blood was already beginning to become a mirror, for the sun set in its reflection. But it became clear by the devilish smile on the woman in red's face that he was talking to her. "Oh, Captain, I could let anything pass for you, but I promised my higher-ups and internal affairs a credible source they could use to investigate Titan Industries. Unfortunately, that source is now dead. They will want his head." "You don't need him," Hector said, putting away his gun. "What are you talking about, kid?" "I still have my recording." He looked the woman right in the eyes. "I can use that to help your investigation." She looked at him with a pondering hum. "Like you said, I'm the man of the hour." The woman began to laugh. "Oh, I enjoy your practicality. Fine, come with me. I'll debrief you once we get back." She looked to her android escorts and motioned her heel toward Stanton's corpse before heading back to the chopper that was beginning to spin its propeller blades. The androids went to the body. One took the arms and the other the legs, and they headed towards the ocean. Hector hoped the fish would have a fine meal. He turned back to his new-found comrades. "You have no idea what you're getting into, kid," the boy said, stylishly returning his revolver to its holster. "Are you sure?" Hector nodded. "Me running and being scared is what got Fletcher killed. The truth is, he wanted to go to the cops the second we found it, but I was afraid, and Fletcher paid the price for my cowardice. Hell, you guys met me when I was running away." Hector shook his head. "I'm not going to run away anymore. I'm going to face this with my head held high. If Fletcher were here, I know he'd do the same thing." The boy had old eyes. When he sighed, Hector could feel the disappointment, or perhaps it was admiration ebbing out of him. He held out his hand. "Good luck, kid." Hector took it. "Don't worry, you'll hear from me sooner or later." "Kid," the boy smirked. "You smarmy smartass." Then he turned around and headed down the road. That left him alone with the doll. "So, see you around?" She looked at him with her eyes. They were the most vibrant and alive thing about her. Perhaps the future is an unknown concept. The chopper blades were spinning and the combat androids were heading back to their charge. "Hey, could you do me a favor?" "What do you acquire my assistance with?" "Could you tell me what you saw in the deep net that day?" Noon closed her eyes as she lowered her head, a pulse, ebbing with emotion, appearing like a fish. The simple word sent a chill down his spine, though he had a feeling he had no right to be afraid. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "A white fish." Hector smiled to himself. Of course, he thought. He took a step forward and wrapped his arms around the doll, who stood as stiff as a board. She was warmer than expected. "Pray for me, sister," he said, ending their embrace and walking back towards the chopper. Hector got onto the chopper, and it took off. The doll didn't wave. She watched the chopper for a long moment before walking away and catching up with the boy. The cabin was quiet, with only the soft, muffled sound of the propeller blades spinning. "Who are they?" he asked the woman in red as he looked out of the window. "They are ghosts," she said. She did not smile, but instead seemed to reflect on her words, specters from a forgotten era that have refused to die. Hector laughed softly to himself. "So, you became a ghost, and then sent more ghosts to save me from becoming a ghost myself." He thought back to the first time he and Fletcher ever dove. It was the strangest experience in his life. What was even more bizarre was the fish that egged him deeper and deeper into the murky depths of the net. The end.